afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I'm Josh Freed, Vice President for the Climate and Energy Program at Third Way. I'm delighted to welcome you to a conversation on how a bold investment in America's clean energy workforce, done right, can build back a stronger U.S. economy. And no one in the U.S. Senate has made the case for this place-based investment better than our esteemed guest, the senior senator from New Mexico, Senator Martin Heinrich. Senator Heinrich, a member of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, is committed to supporting a strong clean energy economy while providing our energy veterans and making sure that domestic energy producers are given a fair shot in competitive global markets. The land of enchantment, as New Mexico is known, relies on revenues from fossil fuel jobs to fund education and critical social services. Communities in New Mexico, as well as Texas, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and others, all of them remain in a precarious position as the clean energy transition moves increasingly into high gear, but also these communities face immense opportunities. We're going to have a discussion with the senator, and then following that, we're pleased to welcome a panel of choice experts to discuss and disentangle exactly what we mean by clean energy infrastructure, what the jobs might look like, and describe how these investments in our future can benefit all Americans. And with that, I'm honored to bring Senator Heinrich into the discussion. Senator, welcome.
Oh, it's great to be with you today.
So let's kick off a little bit with some scene setting. The Biden-Harris administration and congressional Democrats just passed the American Rescue Plan. How do you talk about this really significant legislation with New Mexicans?
Well, I talk a lot about the impacts on individual families. New Mexico has had a really hard year. Impacts to small businesses and restaurants have been substantial. Impacts to children, many of which who do not have broadband, have been really concerning. And so, just talking through the lens of something like the enhanced child tax credit, this is literally the biggest investment in reducing child poverty in our state in many, many decades. And so it has the potential to really jumpstart our economy again, get our kids back in school safely and moving forward once again. And so I try to drill down on the individual pieces and parts that are going to make a big difference for my constituents.
So with ARP just being passed, there's now, of course, in Washington, focus on what comes next. And there's a lot of talk about the next big congressional package being around infrastructure, with major clean energy components a part of it. How would you like to see that legislation come together for New Mexico and for other Western states?
Well, I think there will be a number of things that I'm going to be looking for. As we make this transition, I think it's critical that we invest in those communities that have been producing energy for a long time and help them through this transition. We also need to make smart investments and to the extent we can, technology neutral investments in a lot of different sectors. Transmission is a great example of that. A lot of the work that we're going to do to clean up the grid is going to require new transmission to connect the places where we're going to generate that, like in New Mexico, with the markets that are going to purchase that. Most of the renewables that we have been developing in New Mexico, and we're developing billions of dollars worth of renewables, gigawatts of new wind and solar energy, that's not for New Mexico's consumption for the most part. We're only 2 million people, but those gigawatts are in huge demand in places like California or even Phoenix. So having the transmission in place to make sure that we balance those things is going to be really key. And energy storage is another place where we can really sort of supercharge this transition.
Yeah, it's helpful, and it's interesting to hear the symbiosis between New Mexico as a producer of energy and the other more populous parts of the country that may consume it. One other challenge that we've started to hear more about is Republicans have been lukewarm at best around acting on infrastructure, even though we've heard about Infrastructure Week for many years. What might it take to get 10 Republicans on board for a package that is significant?
I don't want to necessarily speak for my Republican colleagues, but you don't know if you don't ask and you don't listen. So I think it's incumbent upon the president and the White House. It's incumbent upon those of us here in the Senate to be having those conversations with our colleagues to figure out where that common ground may be. And no matter what the eventual process for this is, the more bipartisan pieces and parts you can put in a package, the better your chances are of really building more of a bipartisan consensus and creating durability as well.
Yeah, and the durability is certainly one key, and we've seen how quickly things may change as administration shift. And one question on that front, we noticed that you introduced a resolution of disapproval in the Senate today to cancel the Trump administration's harmful rollback of methane leakage protections. Can you talk a little bit about that and the purpose of that and why that's an important action to take now?
You bet. Well, one, methane is when you have leaky infrastructure around oil and gas production and you're losing methane, you're also leaking all kinds of other things into the air that my constituents live in, work in, breathe. So it's a very serious public health issue, especially in the northwestern and southeastern parts of my state. In addition, it's a huge waste of a valuable resource. There's a reason why the best in class producers don't lose nearly as much methane because they're investing. They want to keep that. That's their product. That's what they sell. So we want to minimize waste as much as possible. And then it's a huge climate driver. I mean, this is obviously something that in the short term is many, many times more potent than CO2. So for all of those reasons, the Trump administration rule was running counter to even what we were hearing from many of the industry leaders. So it's just long past time that we set our nation as the world standard for making sure that we're not wasting resources and we're protecting public health.
Yeah, and one of the things that builds off of that is you alluded to the oil and gas industry as one of the major employers in New Mexico. And how do you balance that and the critical role it plays as an employer, as a source of tax revenue, with the country and an economy that's really shifting towards clean energy?
It's a huge challenge. There's no way around that. And I think one of the things that I have tried to do differently is I've seen a lot of elected leaders over the years who've built their careers on trying to wish for a future that's not going to happen and fight to maintain the past. And the reality here is that markets have made decisions about which direction we're going to go. Things are going to become less and less carbon intensive as a result. So I think the balance that I want to strike is to respect the past and respect the workers and communities that have really done this work and produced an economy and reasonable, affordable energy for us. And at the same time, look for the opportunities to grow and diversify the future jobs, and look for the opportunities to pivot, in particular, the oil and gas industry towards what the future of energy might look like. And so, in the last 6 months to a year, I've really been doing a deep dive on the potential for the hydrogen economy. It's one of those places where the oil and gas engineering expertise, the skill set among our trained workers lines up almost one-to-one with what we're doing in oil and gas right now. And so that's a place where we're trying to get more attention to U.S. hydrogen production. How do you move from gray to blue to green, or I actually don't like the color spectrum because there's a bunch of flavors in between those. And how do you start that process so that we can both decarbonize the economy and keep people in good jobs?
Yeah, we are thrilled to hear that and couldn't be in more agreement. And I think our next panel will even dive more into some of the issues around hydrogen and opportunities there. One question, and I know you're going to unfortunately have to run in a couple minutes to vote. You have an audience for this interview that's full of clean energy advocates. Is there something you'd advise the advocacy community do differently in how we talked about these issues, particularly in the way that your constituents, that people in the oil and gas or other industries are hearing about it?
Well, I think one, the clean energy advocates need to also speak to folks who have jobs today or who had jobs in the not too distant past doing the other parts of the energy economy, producing coal, producing oil and gas, and meet them where they are, because these people have done incredible work for our country. So that's one thing. Two, I would say embrace public health, because so much about this transition is really rooted in healthier work environments, home environments. I mean, the truth is we're starting to realize that combusting even natural gas inside our homes is a really bad idea, but people don't know that. We've never set standards for, we don't have the same venting standards for a gas range that we have for a gas water heater or a furnace, and there's a reason why those things are vented. So I think public health, and then just being really cognizant of the fact that economic transitions are hard, and we need to respect everyone's identity, work, life to make this as smooth as we can possibly make it.
Well, that is a great place to end the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us, Senator Heinrich. We really appreciated this and enjoyed your remarks and look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you all.
Appreciate it. And with that, I'm thrilled to hand it over to Justin Moreland to moderate our panel discussion.
Oh, thank you, Josh. I'm thrilled here to be here today with this great panel, a really timely panel as well, on clean energy jobs and economic recovery. I'm Justin Moreland. I'm a senior correspondent at Time Magazine. I write about climate. I'm going to just give everybody on the panel a quick opportunity to introduce themselves, introduce their role and their organization, just so everyone has a chance to familiarize themselves with that. Lindsay, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'd love to. Hi, everyone. My name is Lindsay Walter. I'm Deputy Director for the Climate and Energy Program at Third Way, hosting the event today. So we're very thrilled to have you all. We've been doing a lot of work, and what I'll be focusing on in this panel is on some of our recent analysis on the employment and economic benefits of some of these different clean energy infrastructure projects and policies that we're discussing as part of a larger infrastructure package. So I'm very excited to be a part of this panel, and I look forward to talking with everyone.
Shalonda.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon here in DC anyway. I'm Shalonda Baker, and I am the Deputy Director for Energy Justice at the U.S. Department of Energy, and I'm in the Office of Economic Impact and Diversity. I am so honored to share the stage and honored to serve as the country's first ever Deputy Director for Energy Justice. My work is really to help advance the President's vision for a more just clean energy economy, and I'm happy to talk about that today.
Great, and Josh.
Hi, my name is Josh Nasser. I'm the Legislative Director for United Auto Workers. And, in this area, we've been very focused on changes going on in the auto industry, with electric vehicles and fuel economy standards and such. And just to let you know, besides our members who work directly for the auto companies, we also have a lot of members who work in auto parts and retirees that rely on the health of the auto industry. So it's great to join everyone today.
Thank you, and Heidi.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Heidi Binko. I am the Executive Director and co-founder of an organization called the Just Transition Fund, and we work across the country with communities in both places where coal plants and coal mines have closed to help them make a transition to a new economy. And I'm really excited to be a part of this panel and excited to talk with you about all these issues today. Thanks for having me.
Great. Thank you all. I think to kick it off, I'm going to ask each one of you a sort of series of questions related to a similar theme, which is obviously clean energy is necessary to tackle the climate challenge. It comes with a whole range of co-benefits, health, et cetera. But also it's a nuanced challenge. Getting through this energy transition is a nuanced challenge that presents a whole slew of more specific challenges. And so I want to go through to each one of you and ask about one of those specific challenges, starting with you, Shalonda. How can policymakers make sure that clean energy jobs are widely accessible? They reach a segment of the population that historically maybe hasn't been incorporated in the energy industry.
Sure. So thank you so much for the question. I actually feel like the question presents an opportunity to talk about some of the underlying inequities that are already in existence within the clean energy sector. So we know from studies that the sector itself lacks diversity. And in order to ensure that certain communities have access to the benefits of clean energy, we need to make sure that people in that industry are actually from those communities. And so I think one of the ways the government can do that is to start at the bottom. I mean, we know that this transition has to happen today, but we actually need to start to create pathways for those types of jobs and to be thinking creatively about the types of folks that can be in those jobs. And so I'll give you a couple of examples. So we know that this pandemic has disproportionately impacted communities of color, both in terms of the death rates and exposure rates, but also in terms of the devastating job losses that we've seen across our service economy in particular. And I think here's an opportunity, as the president likes to say, to build back better, right? And to make sure that those folks who've been impacted by this pandemic have training opportunities and abilities to participate in this clean energy economy. And I think that's low-hanging fruit, in this transition. I also want to just bring my colleague, Jennifer Kropke, who's the director of jobs, into this conversation. And she came out of the labor movement in LA, and she was innovative there and created pathways for, formerly incarcerated individuals who got caught up in the drug wars, right? Nonviolent offenders to get clean energy jobs. And again, these are high-paying union jobs that people can get into. And so we need to think, again, creatively and expansively. And there's some real low-hanging fruit when we think about expanding opportunities for folks in this transition.
Yeah. Well, Josh, I want to ask about labor and how, what should policymakers be doing to ensure that clean energy jobs are organized jobs?
Great. Thanks for the question. I mean, first of all, we need to badly update our labor laws. I mean, the reality is that the NLRA has not been strengthened since it was passed in 1935. And right now, there are employers fighting unions are extremely aggressive, and it's a very slanted playing field. So there's the PRO Act, which passed the House, and I think it's important for it to pass the Senate because, across the board, we're seeing lower unionization rates, which doesn't, by the way, just affect the people in the workplace. It also affects their colleagues. You see this effect when there's higher union density, the wages will go up in a whole sector. We've seen that in auto, for example. The other thing I'd say is that, when there's government money, and that's in the form of tax breaks or in the form of just direct subsidies to manufacturers, there should be conditions to that money. It should be that, there's a responsibility to the community, to the workers, and also, to having that work done in the United States, because that's another issue around this, is making sure where the work is done. So I think, just kind of just hoping for the best, giving a subsidy and hoping for the best has proved ineffective. So, but there is an opportunity here, and we think it would behoove everyone to fully take advantage so we could create those good union jobs the president's talking about.
Right. Well, Heidi, I want to come to you next and just ask, these jobs, clean energy jobs, are not necessarily just sprouting up in the places that have been left behind in the energy transition. What needs to happen to foster clean energy jobs in places that have been left behind? and to the extent that is a viable option.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. I was struck by something that the senator said. He said, you don't know if you don't ask, and you won't know if you don't listen. Right. And I think at the end of the day, one of the things that we absolutely need to do is to make sure that we're talking to the people and that are most affected by the problem in these local communities. And so that consultation is just critical, not only in this issue, but in a myriad of other issues as we think about economic recovery. So, first and foremost, what comes to mind is the importance of consulting with local leaders. And then, it's interesting. There's a number of things at the state level. We see clean energy jobs are not being created in places where we're losing coal jobs, for example. And when you ask why at the state level, that's because there is a lack of the right kinds of state policy incentives, right? And then at the federal level, what we're lacking is really a robust response that's focused on these communities, whether it be coal, oil, and natural gas, and really thinking about the specific needs of transitioning communities. We at the Just Transition Fund worked with a number of our partners around the country to create this platform called the National Economic Transition Initiative. And that platform calls and outlines for a robust platform, a robust program focused on coal community transition. And it's based on a number of workforce, economic development and diversification, and infrastructure investments. And I really think those three are critical to achieving the success and the outcomes that we're looking for.
Right. Well, as everybody on probably watching in our audience is well aware, and as Josh referenced earlier, and the senator talked about earlier, there's a lot of talk about this infrastructure package that is coming up in Washington, and a lot of the discussion it's been, we don't know the exact details yet, but a lot of the details of the package that we have heard are not necessarily climate focused or clean energy focused, at least on the surface. But I want to come to Lindsay and just to ask, when you think about a climate infrastructure package, a clean energy infrastructure package, what does that mean? And I'm particularly interested in things that maybe are really related to climate and clean energy in your view, but don't seem like it on the surface.
Thanks for that question, Justin. So I think there's a lot of climate and clean energy infrastructure jobs that people might not think of when we're talking about clean energy infrastructure. There's the kind of stereotypical, we're going to build wind and solar, transmission lines, energy efficiency, energy storage, some of those kind of more closely associated, I think, with clean energy infrastructure. But there's actually a whole wide range of infrastructure that I might classify as clean energy that people might be thinking of. And we just completed an analysis with some partners with Industrial Economics Incorporated on some of these clean energy infrastructure projects that show that you can create over 1 million annual jobs through 2026 with some of these kind of different types of clean energy infrastructure projects. So that includes not only things like transmission lines, but also pipelines for hydrogen and for CO2 transport, infrastructure to store or sequester CO2, port infrastructure in order to have a more efficient offshore wind industry and having a more supportive port infrastructure on that front, charging stations, and also I would classify there's innovation infrastructure. So demonstration projects for the next generation of clean energy technologies like advanced nuclear or carbon capture and storage. And so all of this is clean energy infrastructure and is contributing to a more sustainable zero carbon future. And I think when we talk about opportunities in an infrastructure package, we can get a little bit more creative about what we're actually classifying as clean energy infrastructure and what's going to help us reach that ultimate target of net zero. I think it's a lot more broad than we're currently discussing.
Right. Well, I just want to add, I encourage anyone to jump in anytime they have something to add. But I am curious to go to Shalanda or to Heidi. To what extent do you think clean energy is the avenue that will help aid some of the frontline environmental justice communities, aid some of, I asked this question to some degree earlier to Heidi, but aid some of the communities that have been left behind in the energy transition? Are we placing too much on clean energy? What can it do?
Heidi, do you want to start it off?
Sure. Yeah, no, that's great. And just to jump in really quickly, just to follow up on Lindsay's excellent comments, I would just also put broadband in that category of infrastructure that we absolutely have to think about. When we surveyed our grantees in the coal communities that we work with, the FCC data just does not show the whole picture, right? So we've just got wide swaths of rural America that are just, even urban America, disconnected, right? And when you don't have those connectivity rates, you cannot do economic development. You cannot address equity issues. Inequities only compound. And forget about addressing climate change, because you can't even think about doing and implementing climate or clean energy 2.0 technologies if you don't have a smart grid, right? So for all of the constituencies that we're talking about here, I just keep feeling like broadband is almost the gateway drug, right? It's the thing that is going to help us in all other areas. Oh, so to answer your question, Oh, go ahead, Shalonda. I'll come back.
Okay, we can ping pong a little bit. So I just wanted to double down on what you said, Heidi, about sort of the basics, right? I mean, we have communities in this country that lack access to running water. In America, in 2021, we also have communities in this country and a lot of tribal nations that lack access to electricity. So when we're talking about the renewable energy transition and clean energy as sort of a panacea, this is our leapfrog for those communities, right? They're leaping over sort of fossil fuel infrastructure and generation, and they're going right into this clean energy future. And so for them, it is the answer. And I would say for those who do have access to electricity in this country, we know that energy burden is extraordinary in communities around the country. And when I talk about energy burden, I'm really talking about the overall amount that a household uses to meet energy needs. And we know that communities in places in the South, for example, have houses that are just filled with holes. I mean, the heat, the electricity, or the air conditioner just goes straight through those walls, right? And they lack weatherization because of the housing stock. And so for them, access to weatherization and solar, for example, is the gateway to lower that energy bill and allow for them to have more money in their pockets on a monthly basis. For those households that are experiencing things like energy insecurity, which is predominant in communities of color. So the Energy Information Administration conducts a survey every 5 years called the REX, the Residential Energy Consumption Survey. And their 2015 study showed that 1 in 3 American households experiences energy insecurity. And when we're talking about energy insecurity, we're really talking about using coping mechanisms and strategies like, ovens to warm your home, or workarounds, layering yourself up at night, really just struggling to meet those energy needs. And 1 in 3 American households experiences something like that, but 1 in 2 Black households experiences something like that. And 61% of Native American households experiences something like that. So for them, yes, the clean energy transition is the gateway. I would say the next gateway, right, in addition to broadband, but this is what's going to move the needle and change the lived experiences of folks in communities suffering from burden and insecurity.
Yeah, would you like me to follow up with the question you originally asked me, Justin?
Sure. And then, why don't you go ahead? And then Josh, did you have something after that? Also, okay, great. That sounds, that's great.
Great. Okay, great. No, Shalonda, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think too, though, it's really, though, important for us to really not think that clean energy is the answer, right? So at the JTF, we do a lot of work on economic development and diversification. And so we're looking at these communities who have been so long dependent on mono economies. And what we don't want to do is we don't want to take a dependence on a mono economy and swap out one thing and make it, help enable these communities to be dependent on another, right? And, just like we would want to diversify our financial portfolios, it's the same thing. To create vibrant, thriving local economies, they need to be diversified, right? So while clean energy, as all the great examples that Shalonda was pointing to, plays a really, really critical role, it is not the only thing, right? There's cultural tourism, there is, a wide swath knowledge economy, reclamation economy. There's a number of manufacturing, right? There's a number of sectors that I think that we need to think about and that are going to work in different places. And I think it really comes down to asking, what are the assets of a place, right? What is going to work here in this this place, and then you build from there.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah, so speaking about kind of like expanding, adoption of electric vehicles, which is less than 2% of the U.S. market right now. I mean, part of the problem is they're not affordable, a lot of folks. So having kind of federal policy that can really lower the costs and having more, also more targeted programs. I mean, like the 30D program. I mean, you can import the car, and someone who's a multimillionaire can get the tax write-off. So that's not really how we should be structuring the programs. We should ensure do what we can to ensure the work is in the U.S. And I would just say, when it comes to clean energy jobs, I mean, I know everyone here realizes that people who have their jobs lost or threatened, they're not interested in just having a short-term Band-Aid. They're looking to land a good new job. And frankly, the quality of jobs we're seeing, as far as the clean energy jobs, if you will, overall are not very good. So there's really a lot of work to do. And I think more people will buy into all of this if they see good economic outcome. If they see that, but they have to really experience this. It has to be real. It can't just be us making policymakers making promises. So it's daunting, but this is a great conversation. Anyway, thanks.
And I love this group, but Justin, I don't want to take over your moderation.
No, please. Let maybe you have the last word here, and then I'll take us in a little different direction.
Sure. I mean, I feel like we could just spend so much time together. I'm loving this panel. I just wanted to add something to what Josh is saying, which is we also need to think about wealth creation and the types of folks we view as makers, right, and entrepreneurs and creators. So yes, we need a diverse workforce, and we need a diverse cohort of makers, right, and people who are going to innovate in this new economy. And I couldn't agree more, Heidi. I mean, we can't be narrowly focused only on the clean energy transition, but we know that that's going to foster that economic development that will feed into the entrepreneurial future that we hope many communities will go into. So it's all sort of feeding into each other, I think, and not, isolated. But I just wanted to double down on that point.
Great. Yeah, great. I want to follow up on EVs. Josh brought up EVs. Obviously, EVs have become the future of transport for passenger vehicles. It also presents a challenge for labor. I mean, they are less labor intensive than internal combustion engine vehicles. How does the union navigate that? And what's the role for federal policy in helping deal with that element of the transition?
Well, I mean, first of all, we need a seat at the table, and I think by having the collective bargaining, we're able to have a seat at the table, but only at a few of the OEMs. There's a large swath of the industry where the workers don't have much of a say, any at all. So I think, first of all, having people have input and meaningful input is important. The other thing, though, is that there really has to be a focus within federal, and by the way, state money too, I would say, to foster EVs, of really focusing on the quality of the kind of jobs that are created. We shouldn't be allowing, what's we're seeing. We're concerned, frankly, that some of the jobs that are being created, are not the high quality jobs that we're used to in the auto industry. There's some concerns about that. But the other thing is, we're concerned that there won't be enough that too many of the jobs are overseas. I mean, when you look at kind of like China and batteries, I mean, the projections about where it'll be in 7 years is kind of frightening. I mean, it's saying like 70% or so will be in China and less than 10% in the U.S. So we really have to bring the supply chains here, and that's why I think the executive order that President Biden's put out there on supply chains is also critical to this conversation. So those are just some of the ideas, but the bottom line is that we need leadership. We need federal policy to really press the idea that the products have to be made in the U.S. and that they have to be good union jobs. It won't happen just on its own.
Is there, I just to press a little more, is there anything in particular? You mentioned the executive order. Is there anything else though that would really be helpful? And I noticed a lot of nodding heads. So if anyone else wants to jump in on that too, I would love to hear it. But I'll start with Josh.
Well, I mean, I think absolutely. I mean, as far as the helpful is strengthening labor law, and I think absolutely it's going to be when there's this effort to kind of look at different pools of funding in, let's say, a next package of really making some deliberate choices there about how that money is allocated and really where the things are manufactured. One last thing to say, once production is overseas, it's incredibly hard to bring it back. I know we talk about reshoring, but the best solution is not to have the jobs go away in the first place. and we're at kind of a crossroads where we actually can, really have a much bigger footprint in that future. But we need people, if people aren't buying the cars here, that's going to be very difficult. So lowering the cost is a big part of it too.
Yeah, Lindsay.
I was nodding my head while Josh was speaking. There were two things going through my mind. Just the rate at which we need to deploy EVs in the US to be on track with net zero. In the next decade, we're looking at 10 to 30 times the amount of EVs we have on the road today. And so where we're going to be manufacturing and getting those is a big question that I appreciate Josh bringing up. And I just wanted to flag for the group the importance of domestic manufacturing. In particular, at Third Way, we're a huge advocate of the 48C advanced manufacturing tax credit and other policies like that can incentivize, manufacturing here at home domestically for these types of advanced industries, vehicles being one of them, that are going to play an essential role in the transition.
Yeah, great. Well, so I want to change gears a little bit and go to Shalanda about the Biden's Justice 40 initiative, which, for anyone who isn't familiar, sets. I want to make sure I get the language right. Seeks to ensure, is how I've written it. Seeks to ensure that 40% of infrastructure spending, and Shalanda, correct me if I'm getting any of the details here wrong, but 40% of this infrastructure federal investment serves disadvantaged communities. How do you make that a reality, and how are you defining, it's serving these communities?
Right. So you were very close, Justin, in the description of Justice 40. Well, so let me lay it out a little bit more. So Justice 40 lives in Executive Order 14008, which is something that has become my guide in my work on a day-to-day basis. And so Section 223 of that executive order, which is broadly known as the climate order, it's tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad. And that order is actually, I think it's going to be, it will be a landmark order. I think if we look back on this in 10 or 15 years, it talks about transitioning communities, talks about environmental justice communities. And Section 223 lays out the Justice 40 initiative that you described, Justin. And that initiative is the promise to move 40% of the overall benefits of certain federal investments to disadvantaged communities. And you highlighted the difficulty of understanding what benefits are, and that is absolutely true. There's also a term in the Justice 40 initiative in Section 223, disadvantaged communities, that is yet to be defined. And so these are two terms that will need to be fleshed out and are going to be fleshed out through the federal process. I mean, the order also stands up an internal group for environmental justice and an external group for environmental justice. These are White House working groups that are going to be diving in to these different terms. And I want to give some response to your question about the challenge of benefits. So we can think of benefits in two different ways, really, both quantitative and qualitative benefits. And so notice that the language isn't 40% of overall investments. So we know it's not going to be a dollar sign per se, but when we think about, there will be certain quantitative aspects. I think the dollar piece should play a role in the analysis as well as job creation. But there are other kind of harder to quantify benefits, like health benefits. There are folks who've worked at places like EPA and also the Department of Energy who have already started to think about benefits and metrics and measuring success in quantifying those those more qualitative metrics into a quantitative framework. And we'll be leaning in on those experts to really think through how they measure things like health benefits and other softer benefits that aren't low-hanging fruit. I think the other question with benefits is against what time horizon, right? Are we talking about today? Or are we talking about 5 years? Are we talking about 10 years? And I think communities would say, we want to talk about today. And there will be a stakeholder engagement process through the external, working group on environmental justice to flesh out some of those things and really to be in dialogue about what those things should look like. And the last thing I'll say is, we're not starting from scratch. So New York has been engaged in its own process. It has very similar language in the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, where they're promising benefits to disadvantaged communities. So the same exact framing, and NYSERDA and the Climate Justice Working Group are working through what those definitions mean. And so we'll be building on that work. And then in California, similarly, they have a legislative framework and statutory commitment to disadvantaged communities. And all of these conversations are happening at the same time. And it's so exciting to be in this moment where we're going to transform communities through investment in clean energy. So I'm excited.
Great. Yeah, well, we're almost at audience question time, and I encourage anybody in the audience who has a question to submit one. But before we get there, I thought I would ask each of the panelists to perhaps, and Shalonda, you are a part of the administration, so you, of course, can step back and not answer this if you want, but to say what you would like to see out of the administration's infrastructure proposal, which we should see very soon. So maybe we'll start with Lindsay, if you'd like.
Yeah, that sounds great. I think what I would like to see and what Third Way would like to see out of a broader infrastructure package is a combination of clean energy, innovation, and transportation infrastructure proposals. I kind of began to list off some of the ones at the beginning of the panel, but it has to be a combination of these spending-based policies, these incentives and grants and subsidies for things like transmission, which is going to be a huge part of being able to meet our climate goals and actually get all of this renewable and clean electricity resources to the communities, not just generating them, but actually getting them to where we're going to need these zero carbon resources. So that's absolutely at front of mind. And then, talk a little bit about the transportation side of things as well, because there's a lot of new transit construction, talking about benefits for communities as well, improving transit systems and transit and transportation maintenance that I would, like to see in a broader infrastructure package that can contribute to our sustainability and our climate goals as well, even if it's not thought of as a zero carbon resource. And then a lot of the other priorities around the types of infrastructure like pipelines, like building out CCS and hydrogen, transport and delivery infrastructure. All of that is what I think is an important priority, not only for meeting our climate goals, but also for creating jobs quickly. And to Josh's point, creating good, well-paying jobs in the type of industries that these coal communities would be more interested in transitioning to.
Yeah. Josh,
sure.
Sorry.
Sure. So I mean, I think the main thing I would say is, is first of all, there has to be, we think it's really important for the administration to support and push for having, labor standards across the board. I'm mostly talking about auto because I'm from the auto workers, but, that's true for other sectors as well. The other thing is, I think, not to be thrown off by, some of the converts on worrying about the national debt. I'm talking about, the Republican, all the Republicans that voted for this enormous tax break that overwhelmingly went to the top 1% are now saying, hey, we can't afford this. And if you look at these kind of investments, I mean, they reproduce several times over. They're so essential. So, just to not be too concerned with the rhetoric of people who will oppose anything you do in the first place. And also to look to things to like closing, corporate loopholes that incentivize offshoring, like to look, broadly at and try to be as ambitious as possible. We think the rescue package is a great law, and we really think that there's even there's another great opportunity here. But let's negotiate against ourselves is what should not happen.
Right. Heidi.
Yeah, thanks. In addition to what Lindsay and Josh have said, I would just emphasize again, for the importance of going beyond, roads and bridges, right? And just really thinking about the social infrastructure that we need in these places, particularly given the economic crisis and the world of economic hurt that these transitioning communities are in. Again, we think a lot about broadband because it is such a gateway to other things, but there's also other basic needs, permanently investing in waste and waste and water affordability programs, right? Thinking more about supporting health and education, right? So there's a number of critical, I think, different ways that you can define infrastructure. And I think when you're dealing with communities that have been up against persistent poverty for decades, many of which, like in Appalachia, who have never recovered from the Great Recession, you really have to just look at this a lot more broadly. So that's how we would think about infrastructure.
Right. Before we move to audience questions, anything, Shalonda, you want to say? I understand if not.
I'm all ears.
Okay.
It's all very interesting. And, the DOE obviously is such a powerhouse in terms of research, and we've done a lot of great things in deployment in various communities. And again, it's an exciting time to be there thinking about the levers that we can push on to move the president's agenda.
Right. Well, I'm going to transition to some audience questions now. We sort of talked about this a bit with Justice 40, but I'm curious. This question is a sort of a bigger macro question about the metrics. So, what are some of the metrics that can be used to gauge the success of this initiative in creating clean energy jobs, especially in disadvantaged communities?
Yeah, I think that's for me. Is it for me, or is it?
It's not.
Maybe Josh as well and others.
I think. Yeah. If you want to start, and then anybody can hop in. So go for it.
Okay. Yeah. So, I think one of the challenges right now is to get a good baseline of where we are. Right. We need to know just how deep the cuts have been in certain communities. Right. This moment of extraordinary economic impacts that we see from this pandemic. And so we need to understand where we are now. And then in terms of measuring, how we proceed, I think we should be holding companies and organizations accountable and having them sort of produce their numbers around job creation, as well as the type of creation, just looking at you, Josh, and whether or not there's a ladder for folks to move up and progress and actually have careers. That's something that we really want to think about in this transition, right? Or is it a one-off, or is it a career that people can build a middle-class life around? And so that's one thing we'll be looking at, and holding companies who have the privilege of taking federal taxpayer money, right? Holding them accountable as they receive those funds.
Can I jump in on that?
Please.
Well, obviously I agree with everything that was said there. But I think we have to just keep in mind that for a lot of companies, they're very it's very secretive and difficult to find out about the quality of jobs. And one thing that I know is a widespread problem in manufacturing are what we call permatemp. There are a lot of companies that they hire workforces that are kind of on a temporary basis. People have these temp jobs, but it's a total misnomer because people can have a temp job for years and years and years. Of course, they have close to no rights and they could be fired any time. And it's really hard to have a voice when your workforce is largely temp workers. So some daylight and some accountability for the the workforce practices, I think, is really, really important, just to add onto what you said.
Another question, I'll direct this one to you, Josh. And we've sort of touched on it in various ways, but asked very directly is how can we unionize clean energy jobs? I assume the question is thinking about some of the existing ones, but answer it however you like.
Well, I think first of all, we need we need a National Labor Relations Board, which actually, has more of a concern for how things are going for workers. I mean, we have a board right now. It's still dominated by people from the Trump administration, nominated by President Trump. For that. That have taken very hostile view towards workers. So kind of having regulations and trying to pass laws like passing laws like the PRO Act are going to be really important to give people the tools. But also what I was saying before is that there really, really has to be tight scrutiny conditions. There has to be conditions, the quality of job, and basing the subsidy or whatever the benefit is based on what kind of employer you are. So there really has to be sticks and carrots used. And it's I'm not making any pretense that any of this is easy. This is extremely difficult, but it's what we have to do.
Heidi, I'll direct this one to you. How will regions in the U.S., particularly the Appalachian region, with a rich history of the coal industry, see their fair share of federal climate resources?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And, I just want to point out, and I think, Shalonda, you touched on this early on in the conversation, but when we think about coal communities, I think we do tend to think about the Appalachian workers, but we have to think about the build out of the Colorado Plateau, right? And how all of the tribal reservations, the Navajo and the Hopi, really just bore so many sacrifices to electrify places like LA and Phoenix, right? So yes, it's about Appalachia, but it's also about tribal nations. It's also about the Midwest, right? So I just think sometimes we have this idea of the coal worker, and it is that worker in West Virginia, and that is absolutely true, but it is so much more than that, right? So I would just start by saying that. And then, the second thing, one of the programs, the federal programs that we were really involved with was the Power Program, which President Obama started. And it was the first time that federal funding was ever made available to coal communities in transition. And he created that in fiscal year 2015. And it's a program that's still around, not as, in not as great shape as it was when he created it, but it's still sort of hung around a bit during the Trump administration. And I think right now, that program has done a lot of good things, specifically through the Appalachian Regional Commission for communities in Appalachia. And that there's an opportunity, I think, to just go back to what we had under Obama, make that a much, much larger initiative that, connecting agencies like the Economic Development Administration and their assistance for coal communities, so we can think much more broadly about that. And I think it's through programs like those that we can really target and focus a sector like clean energy that's got tremendous local economic development potential. I think that's going to be one of the main ways that we're going to help support these communities.
Can I add to that, Justin? Oh,
yeah,
sorry, Shalonda.
Please, yeah, Lindsay and then Shalonda. Great.
So I'd like to add, I mentioned earlier that we've been doing some analysis as part of this joint research initiative. It's called the Decarb America Research Initiative, and we've been doing it with Clean Air Task Force and the Bipartisan Policy Center. And one of the research projects under the initiative was mapping out at the state level the types of clean energy infrastructure and how much and where it was going to be built across the U.S. for our different kind of net zero scenarios, and then what the jobs impact is of that infrastructure build out. And so I just wanted to share that when we're talking about where there's opportunity, nothing's guaranteed, right? You have to have intentional policies where you're being really smart about where you're choosing to build this infrastructure and what communities are going to benefit. So this is not to, wave a magic wand and say this would happen without smart policies. But if you want to talk about the opportunity, the Midwest is incredibly well positioned to take advantage of a diverse set of resources, and including onshore wind, really high quality onshore wind, creating a new zero carbon fuel industry, co-locating, onshore wind with hydrogen production, huge opportunities in CCS in the middle of the country. So when we think of climate action, I think it's focused on the coast, but as far as opportunity in areas that we don't typically talk about opportunity being available, there's a lot in states that maybe typically wouldn't be brought into the conversation. And for every single state, we're seeing more job gain than job loss. That's not to say it's going to be exactly where there is job loss, and that's where we have to be smart about the policy side of things. But just to provide a higher look at the fact that the transition we're talking about does provide significant opportunity in every single region of the United States, even in those that are traditionally more reliant on oil and coal and gas.
Shalonda, if you want to make one more remark and then we're going to close, but I'd love to hear what you were going to say earlier.
Sure. I just wanted to respond to Heidi's point, and now I can respond to Lindsay's point as well, which is, I think that's why the president is really interested in the idea of building back better. We know that there are many communities that have sort of been, for whom coal and oil and gas has been central, right, to their economy. But that industry has not necessarily served everyone in those communities. I mean, the communities that you mentioned, Heidi, are also in energy poverty and so lack access to electricity, even though they've been sacrificed, environmentally speaking, for the electricity in those in LA and Phoenix, for example. So we need to think about using this opportunity as a way to build back even better than we were, right? And so we're going to bring up those folks who were not benefited by the prior regime.
Mm-hmm. And if I could just add one quick question or one quick comment onto that, I think somebody asked earlier about metrics. We started talking about clean energy projects earlier, but, I think it really comes down to who benefits, right? And I just think we have to think about, Shalonda, you used the expression wealth creation. We have to think about, are the people that are in these communities, are they the ones that are being hired for these jobs? Are they the ones whose tax base is being replenished? And, clean energy strategies, they vary, right? So sometimes they are better job creators, that some are better job creators than others. Some create a lot of temporary jobs. Some do more for the tax base, right? And so I think that that's going to be really critical as we think about all of these issues going forward.
Well, I have to pass it off to Lindsay for some closing remarks, but I greatly enjoyed this conversation, learned a lot, and know we could keep doing it. But thank you so much to the panelists and to the audience.
Great. So I'll close this out. I appreciate everyone joining us today for our event on how clean energy jobs can kickstart economic recovery. I know I was really honored to speak on this panel with Shalonda, Heidi, and Josh. And I took some notes throughout on things that different folks had said that stood out to me just to close this out. So, I really appreciated Senator Heinrich's remark about priorities in the infrastructure package that he's looking for in transmission and energy storage, as well as the remarks on how we can build bipartisan support. I think this stood out to Heidi as well, the importance of asking and listening to the response in order to see if we can't create a more durable policy through bipartisanship, and in particular getting to hear how New Mexico can benefit and talking about that state level, how important it is, how they can benefit from policies in the infrastructure package. For example, in New Mexico, producing the electricity and being able to actually export that to other states and having the infrastructure to do so. So some excellent remarks from Senator Heinrich. I think, Shalonda, there were so many things that you said that stood out to me. I really appreciated the conversation about household energy insecurity and the energy cost burden and the disproportionate impact on Black households in particular, that 1 in half are struggling with energy insecurity, and how important it is to create pathways for minority communities to have jobs in the clean energy transition, especially as we look to enter this economic recovery phase. And hearing about how you're doing some of the metrics at DOE for defining these different communities and being able to actually quantify the progress that we're making in these areas. Heidi, I really enjoyed your conversation about community transition and how we need to be actually talking to the people impacted by the problem. The focus on diversifying local economies and making sure that access to broadband is counted as part of clean energy infrastructure, and creating those jobs where there is job loss. And that might not be in the clean energy sector. It could be in other industries, but looking for where there's different opportunities. And then finally, Josh, I really appreciated your remarks on how important it is to update our labor laws, that we should not just be looking at how many jobs we're creating, but the quality of those jobs that we're creating. And especially when we're looking at government policies, tax breaks or subsidies, how there should be conditions on how that money is given out. Is it with good, well-paying jobs requirements, and is it for jobs that are here in the United States? So I give that overview because we covered so much, and it was so wonderful to hear from all of the experts here today. And so just thank you, everyone, for joining us. We've got another event on April 20th that I would love for you all to join us with. And I think with that, I'll close this out. So thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.